My name is Chester. I'm 68 years old, and a lot of things I've swallowed in silence throughout my life. But there is a day, only one, which has become a lump in my throat to this day. Tell me something. What would you do if your own child left you aside, just when you most wanted to be together? And worse, after you've paid for everything. I know, it sounds like something from a soap opera, but it does happen. Sometimes you give your whole life for someone, and at the first opportunity, he treats you like forgotten baggage, a burden, a nuisance. That's what I felt at that airport, suitcase in hand, waiting for a hug that never came. I only received a cold call and a low laugh at the bottom of the line. If you've ever felt left out by those who help the most, stay here with me. Because today, I'm going to tell you the day I discovered that love doesn't hold the door open, and how a betrayal in an airport terminal made me change everything. At the end of this story, you will understand what I did when they came back, and they found a house that was no longer theirs. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know something. When my son returned from that trip, full of expensive bags and tanned from the beach, he found a house that was no longer his, nor his wife's, nor of the family he thought he could maintain at my expense. The keys that I once proudly handed over that day. They were no longer good for any door. It was there that they understood that they had crossed a line that would not return. I'll tell you everything, but if this story has ever stirred any memory of yours, if you have ever felt this kind of abandonment disguised as modernity of family decision, I ask you to stay with me. Click on the like button, subscribe to the channel. This is not by number, it is by company, because telling this is not easy. And knowing that there is someone on the other side listening with an open heart, it makes everything feel less heavy. I'm opening an old wound here. I only ask that you listen with the same respect that I once expected from my own family. I think I was standing there, in the middle of Terminal C, for a good few minutes, maybe more. The noise of the speakers was still there, announcing flights and gates. But for me, everything had gone silent. Only the silence of the phone cut my head off. That silence after the call, when you realize that no one is going to call you back. I held the handle of the suitcase like someone holding a rope that is about to break. It was new. I had bought it just for this trip. A beautiful navy blue, with wheels that turned easily, and that smell of something we buy with pleasure. Inside it were bathing suits, gifts for the boys, a hat that Amanda always said was funny on me. I took it anyway to make them laugh. All made with care, with hope, but too much hope weighs heavily. I walked to the exit as if I were walking on glass. People hurried past with their families, excited children pulling their parents, couples laughing hand in hand, and I was there, alone. More alone than I've been in a long time. The suitcase weighed more and more. Or maybe it was the chest. I took the taxi at the usual stop. The driver, a grey-haired man with a well-groomed beard and a face of someone who has seen too much, asked where I was going. "Home," I said, and the word home hurt more than it should. In the back seat, the leather was cold. The city glided outside the window, buildings, signs, traffic lights, everything kind of blurry, as if the world was moving on without me. I didn't cry. He just breathed slowly, trying not to collapse. The driver broke the silence after a few minutes. "Was the family late, or did they really forget you?" I tried to smile, but the corner of my mouth only trembled. "They went. I stayed." He nodded, as if he had heard it before. "It happens more than it should. I have 2 children. One lives in Denver, the other, well, I don't even know anymore. They only call when they need money." I looked in the rearview mirror. Our eyes crossed for a second. There was sadness in his, and also understanding. "They were going to Hawaii," I said, almost in a whisper. "It was my idea. I paid for everything. I just wanted some time with them. But it seems that only I thought it was important." The driver let out a sigh. "There are people who only know how to catch it, sir. But you're still here, and that says a lot." At that moment, I felt something I had never felt so strongly before. It wasn't just pain. It was a kind of contained anger. Not the one that screams, but the one that silences deeply, like water accumulated in silence. They had torn me out of something I had built myself, as if my presence was a nuisance, as if I had passed the deadline. You know, there's one thing that hurt me more than being left behind. That was the way he spoke. The coldness, distancing. You don't come. Amanda thought it was better that way. There was no excuse, nor a, I'll stay for next time. It was a disconnection. Cold, calculated. As if you were unplugging an old appliance. Let me ask you something, just between us. Have you ever done everything for someone, absolutely everything, and yet been treated as if you were left over? If you've experienced something like this, comment below. It can be just a "I've lived it" or "it touched me." It's good to know that we're not alone when the world decides to forget about us. The car entered my street. The sky was already getting cloudy, as if even time was ashamed of what happened. When the taxi stopped, I looked at my house. The windows closed, the porch empty. It was the same house where Brian grew up, where he learned to ride a bike, where he cried for his first low grade. I was there at every moment, and now I would enter alone. I handed the money to the driver and said, "Keep the change." He looked at me with a kind of respect that we don't see anymore. "Take care, sir. You are worth much more than this gesture of theirs." I entered the house slowly. The familiar smell of old wood enveloped me. I left my suitcase in the corner of the room, where there was still a picture of us in Yellowstone, me, him, and Susan, my late wife. It was summer. Brian was laughing with his mouth full of ice cream. We were a family there, really. But now, there was only me, and that suitcase, full of clothes that weren't going anywhere. It was there, in that silence, that a decision began to be born within me. There would be no scandal, nor fight, not even tears. But there was also no room for those who used me and discarded me. They were still going to come back, and when they came back, they would find an old man different from the one they left at the airport. But what did they expect to find when they knocked on that door? When I entered the house, I had the strange feeling of stepping into a place that no longer belonged to me in the same way. It was my home, of course. Every corner, every smell, every creak of the floor knew my name. But on this day she looked different, cold, as if I knew what had happened to me. I closed the door slowly, left the suitcase leaning against the wall, and stood there, looking around as if assessing the rubble of a battlefield. The silence was heavy, and it was not the common silence of loneliness, the one that we learn to live with after the wife leaves. It was another type, a silence that screams inside us as if to say, "It's over." I went to the kitchen, turned on the kettle, and sat in the armchair in the living room. The same armchair where I saw Brian open the college letter, where Susan read her books on Sunday afternoons, where my grandchildren sat on my lap to listen to stories they now find ridiculous. On the shelf, the photos still smiled, his marriage, the family trip, graduation, and in all of them I was there, always in the background, always helping, always holding the structure. I remembered the time he lost his job, and I took money from my retirement to pay off the mortgage on his house. I remembered the car I bought when he passed the entrance exam. I even remembered the wedding day, when Amanda made a point of making it clear that all this was only possible because of the support of my family. And she said it with a smile that I see differently today. I walked around the house as someone who goes through a lifetime with a new weight on my back. Each room was a piece of me that they had ignored. The guest room, where they slept when they came to visit me. The kitchen, where I cooked the children's favorite dishes. The bathroom, where Amanda once complained about the too coarse towel I left. Details that were now burning. I sat back in the armchair, put my hands on my knees, and said only to myself, "They're not going to use my kindness as a ladder anymore." I repeated this phrase as if lighting a match in the darkness. It was a promise, not made of anger, but of decision. I had spent too much time being the available man, the father who said yes, The grandfather who waited at the gate. And for what? To stay at the airport with a new suitcase and a heart too old to bear that again? No. Something had to change. That night, I drank my tea in silence. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't open the book. I just stared into the void, as someone who listens to his own past trying to find a direction. When I went to sleep, I didn't turn off the lights in the living room. It was as if I didn't want the house to rest before me. But that morning, lying in the same bed where I shared my entire life with Susan, an idea began to grow slowly. And it wasn't going to stop anytime soon, because if they thought they could walk away using me and come back as if nothing had happened, they were about to find out that the old man here still knew the value of his own house. But what did they think they would find when they returned from that trip? The next day, still with the bitter taste of that night on my lips, I went to the office I set up in the back room, a small space. But it was always my refuge when I wanted to think or organize my life. I sat in front of the computer with a calm that even scared me. I had no anger in my chest at that moment, just an old weight wanting to turn to stone. I opened the bank's website and typed my password slowly, as if I already know that you won't like what you see. When the page loaded, the thud came quickly. The extract of the last few days looked like a luxury movie script. Dinners at Honolulu's Nobu, over $300 in a single night. Rental of an imported convertible for 3 days. Brand stores, watches, even $1,000 spa for the couple. Everything on the extra card I had given to Brian, only for emergencies. I stood there looking at the screen as if being slapped without waiting. It was more than money. It was as if each transaction was a spit on my goodwill, a painful memory that I was not even invited to the role of spectator of that trip. And worse, I paid for the show. I printed the statement page by page. I put it on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. The numbers there seemed to scream everything he never said. You're only good for paying. It hurt me. It hurt me more than any scream, any verbal rejection, because it was silence with proof. That paper was my certificate of foolishness. While they toasted at resorts with towels folded in the shape of a swan, I was here, sitting alone, with a cold kettle and my heart in pieces. I took a deep breath. I didn't cry. I just leaned my back on the chair and let time pass a little. The day outside was beautiful, but I couldn't see anything beautiful at that moment. That's when something changed inside me. I stood up, but not in that hunched, tired, usual way. I got up with another body, a body that would no longer accept being stepped on. The hurt turned into firmness. And firmness, when it comes from an old silence, can be dangerous for those who think he will never react. I knew what I had to do, and it wasn't going to be long. I just needed the next step. But before that, have you ever wondered what you would do if you found out that your own family used you and still smiled over it? Because what I found out later, it was even worse. The next morning, I woke up even before the sun painted the sky. I didn't even need the alarm clock. Sleep properly, I didn't sleep. But the body seemed to know that this would be an important day. I put on my blue button-down shirt, the one Susan said made me look like a determined man, put on my polished shoes, and left the house with the firmness of someone who is going to bury a chapter. The city was still waking up when I arrived at the First National Bank in downtown Portland. The imposing building, with those old columns, received me with the same cold air as always, but I entered as if I owed nothing to anyone. The manager, Lisa, a polite, soft-spoken woman, had known me from the past. When he saw me, he smiled and said, "Good morning, Mr. Chester. What can I help with today?" I took a deep breath, put the folder with the statement in front of it, and said calmly, "I want to cancel the additional cards and remove Brian and Amanda from the account. They are no longer allowed to do anything." She looked at me as if she was scared in disguise. "Are you sure about that? It's a change. Pretty big." I got a little closer, looked her in the eyes and said, "They left me alone at the airport, and they spent my money like it was garbage. I'm right, Lisa." She nodded, no further questions, and began the process. One click here, another there, and it was done. He gave me the new documents, asked me to sign it, and there, with each letter of my name, I also signed the end of tolerance. It was not revenge, it was self-respect. I left the bench with lighter shoulders. It was as if he had taken a backpack full of stones off his back. I walked to a coffee shop on the corner, a small, dark wood place where I used to go with Susan on Sundays after Mass. I sat at the corner table, ordered a black coffee without sugar, and stood there looking out the window, watching life go by outside. Cars passing by, people in a hurry, dogs dragging their owners along the sidewalks, and I in peace. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control of my own story. Not like the father who says yes to everything, not like the old man who waits for a call, but as a whole man, a man who, even though he was hurt, still knew how to get up. You know, I'm here opening my heart, telling my story. Each word of this comes from a deep place, from a silence that has held pain for years. If you're listening to me, leave a like on this video. Subscribe to the channel too, because I still have a lot of things in store to tell you. And look, telling yourself this is not just venting. It's like sitting on a balcony with a friend and for the first time, talking about everything that's stuck in your throat. I finished my coffee slowly, without rushing. The taste was strong, bitter, but that day it felt right. The world no longer spun out of control. I knew that from then on my every step would have a purpose, but there was still more to discover, because as much as I thought I had seen the worst, what I found in those old papers in the house made me understand that Amanda was not just ungrateful, she was dangerous. And when I saw what she tried to do, then yes, my penny dropped for good. But did I find out in time? I left the cafe and walked a few blocks to a quieter, tree-lined street, one of those that still have that old Portland charm. My steps were slow, but steady. At the back of the folder, along with the bank statements, I also had a decision. I called from the payphone on the corner of Cedar Street, right in front of the barbershop I frequented for 30 years. The phone rang 3 times until the deep, familiar voice answered. "Harlan Reese," I smiled, even without him seeing. "Harlan, it's me, Chester." On the other side, a silence of recognition followed by a warm exclamation. "Well, pray, Chester, is everything okay?" I replied in a calm tone, but one that left no doubt. "It depends. I need you to see me today." He understood right away. We made an appointment for a little while later in the small office he kept upstairs in a local market, where he still handled some cases out of pure love for the craft, and perhaps because he couldn't stand to stay away from the smell of paperwork for long. When I arrived, he greeted me with a somewhat awkward but sincere hug. Harlan was a man who always had more to hear than to say. We sat down. I opened the briefcase and, without beating around the bush, put everything in front of him. The statements, the notes, the travel bills, the card expenses, the dates. He read everything in silence, frowning at some points. At the end, he took off his glasses, rubbed his eyes, and said, "That's ugly, Chester, very ugly." I nodded. "That's why I'm here. I want to revise my will." He looked at me as if looking for a doubt, but he didn't find any. Understood. "What do you have in mind?" I took a deep breath. "I want to remove Brian, totally. Nothing goes to him, not even for Amanda, not even for either of them." Harlan just nodded. "And the house? There will be a protection clause. No one can touch it without my permission until the day I die. And then, well, then I want it to go to something bigger. I want it to be sold, and the money to go to a scholarship fund. Children who need it. Young people who didn't have anyone to pay for the first chance, like I did for my son." Harlan wrote everything down in silence. "And the rest of the goods. I divide it between causes that I believe in. Nursing homes, community centers, support groups for widowers, veterans. But not a penny goes to the 2 of them. Not one." He looked up. touched but not surprised. This is justice, Chester. Silent but firm. We spent more than 2 hours reviewing documents, remembering dates, correcting names. He called an employee who had already been on his old team, an efficient girl named Beth, to take care of the bureaucratic and testimonial part. And at the end of that day, I signed the New Testament with a trembling hand, but a calm heart. It was as if I had rebuilt my own future, a future without the weight of ingratitude, without the ghost of waiting for someone who doesn't come. When I left the office, the sky was already turning orange. A light wind passed me, and for a second I felt as if Susan was there, watching me, supporting me. She always had the gift of knowing when I was carrying too much, and now I felt like I was starting to let go of that burden. But there was still more to do, because what I thought had been the end of the line, it was still only half of the whole. And the name of the whole, it was Amanda. What was she doing behind my back while I was still opening the door for her with fresh coffee in my hand? I returned home that evening with a full head but a firm heart. I knew I had done the right thing with the will. It was like rearranging the pieces of a board that they thought they still controlled. But even with all that resolved on paper, a part of me still felt that I had something pending. And it wasn't just feeling, it was intuition. The kind of silence that comes not from peace, but from warning. I went to the guest room, where I kept the old files, folders with documents from the house, the car, from the time of retirement. I decided to review everything. I sat on the floor. My legs didn't help much, but that was where I felt whole. I opened envelope by envelope, card by card. Each leaf was a memory, a cycle lived. That's when I found a newer envelope, still closed, with my name written by hand, but with the stamp of the family's accountant, Mr. Wallace. I was surprised by that. He always sent everything by email now. He hadn't used physical mail in years. I opened it carefully. Inside, a formal notification, a request to change ownership of my home, request made just over a month ago. I read it once, twice, 3 times. It was all there, their names, Brian Thomas Reeve and Amanda Collins Reeve. They had tried to transfer the house to their names. Behind my back, I froze. Time seemed to stop at that moment. An icy shiver ran down my spine. But it wasn't fear. It was something worse. It was the bitter recognition that it had not been an impulse, nor a mistake of the moment. It was flat, calculated, premeditated. I had become an obstacle for them, not a person. And now, even though I had paid for every inch of that home, they wanted to tear even the walls out of me. I held the envelope in my hands and felt the paper shake. Or would it be my fingers? I took it to the desk and kept it in the back drawer, along with the card statement and the New Testament. It was one more test, not the evil, but of the total absence of respect, from the void where there should be love. I sat in the armchair and looked out the window. The street looked the same, but everything inside me had changed. The Chester who was waiting at the airport with his suitcase packed, that man had died right there, and what was left now was someone who, even wounded, had risen with the firmness of someone who no longer accepts being used. The house, once a refuge, would now become a trench, and I was going to protect each brick with what little strength I still had. You know, if you've come this far with me, listening to every bit of this story, I need to tell you something. Stay a little longer, because what comes after that changes everything. There is still a moment that gives me goosebumps just remembering it. And look, it's not easy to talk about him, but it was there that I understood who I was, and who they never were. That night, I locked the door with 2 turns of the key. I reinforced the locks on the back window. I went down to the basement and looked at the old built-in safe that no one knew existed, not even Brian. I reorganized the papers. I organized the pain. And I began to raise my fortress. But what I didn't expect, it was the way they were going to try to take me down when they came back. Do you think they gave up easily? No, they came back, and they came back thirsty. But what they found at the gate, No one had ever seen it before. 2 days have passed since I found that damn letter, and on those 2 days the house was silent, but it was a dense silence, one of those who warn that the storm is coming. I spent the hours tending to the garden, washing the porch, checking locks, not out of fear, but because when we decide to raise the walls of our own respect, we have to start with the little things. It was a grey morning, one of those that the sky seems to hide something, when I heard the roar of an expensive engine stopping in front of my sidewalk. I looked out the living room window and recognized it right away. Mason, an old acquaintance, Brian's friend since adolescence. He was always good at talking, full of cheap charm and expensive shirt. He got out of the car with the same rehearsed smile as always, as if he thought he could get around anything with 2 pats on the back. He knocked on the gate gently and called, "Chester, can we talk for a minute?" I opened it calmly. I didn't invite him in. We stayed there, on the balcony. He started a conversation as if he were visiting a distant relative. He said that Brian was worried, that it wasn't quite like that it was all a travel misunderstanding. I just listened, in silence, because sometimes silence speaks louder than any argument. That's when he dropped the pearl. "You know, Chester, perhaps you are seeing things with great emotion. Brian asked me to suggest that you reconsider, restore the cards, open the dialogue. After all, family is family." I took a deep breath. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tremble. I looked him right in the eye and said as calmly as I could, "Tell Brian that the house is no longer his, nor the money, and neither did I." He widened his eyes, trying to keep his smile, but I saw the tension born in the corner of my mouth. He tried to insist, said that everything can be solved with conversation, that Amanda also regrets it, that the boys miss their grandfather. Ah, the boys. Always used as emotional currency when the game tightens. But no, not this time. I opened the door slowly, pointed to the exit politely and said, "We've talked enough. Now I need my silence back." He left, half without understanding, half without accepting, and I locked the door with 3 turns of the key. For the first time in a long time, I got a taste of strength. A bitter taste, yes, but necessary. You know, there's one thing that no one teaches you when you become a father. It's just that one day you may need to protect yourself from your own creation. And when that day comes, it cuts inside in a way that has no remedy. We don't raise children to become enemies, but he also doesn't create to become an executioner. And if you've been through this, if you've ever had to put limits on who you love the most, comment here, write only one, "I understand you," or "I know how it is." Because this pain, when shared, weighs less on our chest. I went back to the living room armchair, my head still boiling. I knew that this was just the beginning. If Brian sent Mason, it's because he didn't have the courage to come himself. But courage, I've learned, isn't about standing up to others. It's about facing what you've done. And if he wasn't capable of that, he may never have been the man I thought he was. From that day on, I knew the next step would not be conversation. It would be confrontation. And what did he do when he finally showed up at my door? It was worse than I expected. But what he heard from me, he would never forget it. The next day, I woke up before sunrise, as if my body knew that this was the day to put an end to an old illusion. I slowly climbed the stairs to the guest room, the one where Brian and Amanda used to stay when they showed up. It was the room that I renovated myself, painted the walls in a light tone, bought a new bed, even put a blackout curtain because she said she couldn't sleep with light. So much done to please, and now that room looked like a fake warehouse. I opened the closet, took off his clothes, expensive shirts, jackets he never paid for, leather shoes he wore to meetings. I folded everything carefully, not by him, for me, because I'm not one to destroy anything, neither things nor memories. Then I went to her side. Imported perfumes, expensive hairdryer, scattered jewelry, creams, bags, everything went to the boxes. I even gathered the forgotten electronics, chargers, headphones, wristwatch. Each object told me, unintentionally, how much I was used, how much my house was transformed into a hotel without affection. I took everything to the backyard. I placed it on the old wooden table. I covered it with a thick tarp, tied it with rope, and secured it with a label, Reeve. Not Brian, not Amanda, only Reeve, because now they were just that. A name on a package that needed to get out of my life. I went back inside and closed the curtains. I called a security company in the city. They came on the same day. I changed all the locks. I installed presence sensors at the entrances, a camera on the balcony. Just in case, I said to the coach, but inside I knew. That was more than security. It was ritual. It was to put an invisible line between yesterday and now. At the end of the afternoon, I sat down at the table and handwrote a short letter, with the slow handwriting of someone who weighs every word. You don't live here anymore. Everything you used is there. Goodbye. I folded the paper, put it inside an envelope, and tied it to the top of the last box with firm tape. There was no anger in my handwriting, not even tears on paper. It was just the truth, written with dignity. I closed the front door, locked it with the new keys, and leaned my back there for a moment. The silence of the house embraced me like an old friend. For the first time in many years, I took a deep breath. I breathed without weight. It was as if all that still air had finally been renewed. The hurt still lived in me, of course, but he no longer commanded anything. It was just a reminder that I had been for too long, too quiet a man. I sat in the armchair and stood there, looking at the room with different eyes. That house now was mine again. Really, not an extension of their life, not a basis of convenience. It was my shelter, my corner. And if someone wanted to get in there, they had to come with respect, or not even try to ring the bell. But I knew that this silence would not last long. They were going to come back, not out of nostalgia, but because they lost control. And when people like them lose control, they come back with claws disguised as hugs. The question was, were they prepared to meet a man they had never met? Because the father who waited with open arms, this one no longer exists. Late that afternoon, Portland's sky closed in a heavy grey, the kind that warns without delicacy. It's going to rain, and it's going to be strong. I had already learned to listen to the sky. I prepared my black coffee, sat in the armchair by the window, and stood there quietly. The hands of the clock were slow, as if they knew what was about to happen. The yellow cab turned the corner slowly, stopped right in front of the gate. They hurried downstairs. Brian and Amanda. Closed face, deep dark circles, that typical expression of someone who waited for applause and found silence. The aura of tropical vacations was gone. Their hair was wet from fine rain, and the designer clothes they wore, the ones I paid for without knowing it, were already starting to stick to their bodies. Brian looked at the gate, tried the doorknob. Nothing. He pulled the key from his pocket, that old copy he never returned. It spun. New lock. He tried again. It hit. He hit hard. "Dad, are you there? Open the door, let's talk." I, on the inside, didn't move a muscle, the breath steady, the heart beating slowly. Amanda yelled behind him, "This is crazy, Chester. What are you doing? We are family." And it was at that moment that I understood. Their time is up. The party without responsibility, the paid trip, the house as a free shelter, the absence disguised as routine. It's over. Brian went around the side of the house, trying to peek through the fence. That's when he saw it. In the backyard, covered by blue tarpaulin and well-tied, were the boxes, those that I prepared calmly, clothes, perfumes, electronics, everything they left here as if it were an extension of the ego. On top, the note. I saw him catch it. He read slowly, wetting the paper with the rain. "You don't live here anymore. Everything you used is there. Goodbye." Amanda approached, saw the contents of the boxes and let out an expletive. Brian looked up at the living room window. Our eyes met for a second. I didn't deflect. And he knew. I knew that that door would not open again. I knew that the old man he always saw as a carpet, now it was a wall. He hit again, screamed, "You're going to regret it! You'll be alone!" And there I felt sorry. Not from me, his, because he thought loneliness was the worst thing that could happen to a man. Little did he know that being surrounded by those who don't respect you is much crueler than being alone. The rain thickened, as if the sky wanted to wash away that whole scene, and I stood there, firm, without getting up, without giving in. They were the first to break the bond, to push the silence between us. I just finished closing the door that they themselves started locking years ago. You know, if this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, help me carry it forward. Like and subscribe here to the channel. This makes more difference than you think, because there are a lot of people going through similar things, and knowing that we are not alone in this pain. Sometimes it's all we need to stay standing. Outside, Brian was trying to compose himself. Amanda was already complaining loudly, soaking wet, pushing him to get back in the car. But he stood a little longer, staring at the house as if he still owned something there. And it was at that moment, when he put his hand on the gate once again, that a question crossed me like a razor. Did they still have a hidden letter? Because whoever deceives his own father once, you might as well try again. And what they did in the following days, it still gives me chills today. The dawn came, dragging the minutes, heavy, thick as fog on a deserted road. I continued to sit in my armchair, the same one where I slept with a fever the first winter after Susan was gone, where I cradled my grandchildren in my arms, where I watched time age me in peace. Only now she was my watchtower. The cell phone next to it vibrated from minute to minute. First short messages. "Dad, we need to talk." Then insistent calls. I didn't answer. He listened. That's all. Because sometimes listening in silence teaches more than responding. Brian called. Amanda too. With each ignored touch, a new layer of truth appeared. "You're going to regret it, Dad. This is not done with one's own family. At least think about the children." And among the tangled voices, there was one that cut me inside, because I had heard it before. "We're finally going to have a vacation without this old man." Amanda laughing in the background, while Brian spoke on speakerphone. It was the audio that was leaked weeks ago, that one day arrived by mistake on my phone, but that I never had the courage to delete. That burned me, and he taught me the contempt they felt for me. Now he knocked on the door back, but I wouldn't open it. The rain passed, but the cold remained, and with it the despair of those who never needed to feel. From the window, I saw them arguing next to the stopped taxi. Amanda cried, but it was not regret, it was uncomfortable. Brian tried to call hotels in the city, all of which were full. It was convention week, and each room had been booked months in advance. She trembled, wet, with her cell phone against her ear, begging for a bed. He yelled at the driver, who already wanted to leave. In the end, with no options, they took a car by app and disappeared around the corner, heading for the only place they could, a cheap motel on the forgotten side of the city. One of those where the windows don't have a decent curtain, the mattress creaks, and the smell of last night never goes away. I knew it, because I've had to sleep in one of these once, decades ago, when all I had was a backpack and a debt on my back, and now it was their turn to understand what it's like to live without comfort, no applause, no support. And I stood there, motionless, listening to the echoes of the past and feeling, for the first time, that silent justice also has a taste. A taste that is not sweet, but not bitter either. It's the taste of truth coming home. And if you have come this far with me, if you have felt every silence of this story, I tell you with an open heart, you are not going away yet. Because the most remarkable moment of this story is still coming. The time when everything will come. The time when those who played dirty sees the game itself collapse. The next morning, the sunlight brought no warmth. It brought revelation, because even after everything, they still hadn't given up. And what did Amanda try to do that day made me sure. I wasn't a father to her. I was a target, and she still had one last letter hidden. Can you imagine what it was? Because I never forgot it. The next day, very early, the phone vibrated again. This time, it was a long message from Amanda. A text so well written that you could even imagine her reading it out loud, with that honeyed tone that she only used when she wanted something. He said that it was all a misunderstanding, that the decision to leave me off the trip was thinking about my well-being, that I needed rest, that the hot weather in Hawaii might not be good for my health. He used words like concern, love, good intention. He signed with affection, Amanda. I read it to the end, twice. Each word was a hook, and luckily I didn't take this type of bait anymore. Soon after, Brian sent an audio. The tone was different, more nostalgic, feignedly vulnerable. He talked about the times when we went fishing in the summer, how he loved it when I let him sleep in my bed on thunder days. He said he missed it, that he wanted to go back to being a family. Hearing that, my chest went quiet. It didn't hit harder. It didn't hurt. Because I had finally understood what they were doing. That kind of approach only happened when their ground shook. It was standard. Whenever they lost something, they remembered that I existed. When they were well, I was just an old name on a credit card. I sat at the table with a cup of coffee and stared at the phone. The audio stopped, the message still open. And then, without anger, without impulse, I deleted everything. I touched delete with the same tranquility as someone who closes a door to avoid draft. Because, you see, the problem was never a lack of love. The problem was too much silence. My silence when I was disrespected. My silence when I was used. But now my silence was a choice. It was command. It was an answer. And you know, there are memories that stick in our souls, right? It can pass as much time as it wants. It can change everything around, but it stays there, clear, as if it had happened yesterday. I remembered my 65th birthday. The house full of people, but my son's blank stare. The generic gift wrapped in a hurry. The dinner where Amanda didn't let go of her cell phone. Absence disguised as presence. Right. Nobody erases that. And look, if you're listening to this now, stop a little bit there. He closes his eyes and thinks, what is that memory that never left his chest? The one who taught you the most, or hurt you the most? Write in the comments, tell me, or just say, I've lived it. Because sometimes sharing the memory is the only way for it to stop hurting. I finished my coffee. I looked at the clock. The day was going to go on. Life too. And even with the storm that was still brewing outside, inside me there was no longer a windstorm, because I was prepared. They were going to try again, of course. People used to manipulating do not accept closed doors easily. And what did Amanda try to do next? It was blood-chilling. Because this time, she went too far. And I had to use one last card that even she didn't know existed. Can you imagine what it was? Because he didn't see it coming. That morning was born with a strange silence. The kind of silence that doesn't come to calm down. It comes to warn. I got up slowly, adjusted my flannel shirt, drank my coffee without haste. There was a decision inside me, firm as stone. I grabbed the blue briefcase from the office, the same one I kept in the back of the drawer after my visit to Harlan, put it in the car, and drove to the less glamorous side of town. The GPS guided me, but I already knew the way. Sunset Stay Motel, faded red lettering, weather-worn facade. I stopped at the side parking lot, at a point where I could see most of the rooms on the upper floor. I didn't get off. I didn't honk. I stood there, in the car, hands firmly on the wheel, looking out the window of room 112. Their car was right next to it. I recognized it by the sign, and there, in that instant, I felt a different kind of peace. It wasn't joy. It wasn't revenge. It was the relief of those who decided not to be carpet anymore. It took me a few minutes before Brian appeared at the window. In his eyes, first came amazement, then despair. He ran downstairs, shirtless, his hair messy. He adjusted his shorts as he could and came to my car. Amanda appeared soon after, leaning against the bedroom door, dejected, with an expression I had never seen in her, uncertainty. Brian stopped a few meters from me and said, almost breathlessly, "Dad, we need to talk, please." I rolled down the window just enough. I looked him in the eye. I saw a man who was, for the first time, out of control, and I spoke in a firm voice the way Susan would say, "You're reaping what you sowed." He didn't seem to understand. Amanda stood still, her arms crossed, but her face gave everything away. She knew. Without saying anything else, I reached out of the car and handed over the briefcase. Inside, a copy of the New Testament, the one that removed the two of them from any rights. I also attached a folded paper with the official cancellation of the cards and a last letter. Short, precise. He only said, "Trust is a safe. When broken into, it never closes the same way again." Brian took the briefcase, opened it right there, flipped through it with trembling fingers. "Dad, this is cruelty. We made a mistake, but that's too much." I closed the window slowly. I started the car. Amanda approached, but didn't say anything. He only looked at me as someone who sees, for the first time, the man behind his father. I left without looking back. And you know, on that journey back home, between traffic lights and wet streets, I understood one thing. Sometimes, the pain we cause in others doesn't come from violence. It comes from the end of access, from the closed door, from the name taken, of the silence that says, "It's over." Because people who never had to apologize sincerely thinks that a sorry fixes everything. But it doesn't fix it, and I was no longer the same one who paid for their wedding party with a smile on his face. Now, I was the man who said, "Enough," and they would have to learn the weight of that word. But even after that meeting, I knew it wasn't the end. People who lose power don't leave without trying again. And what did Amanda try to do in the days that came after? It made me see how far someone is capable of going when they feel the door really close. Do you have any idea what she tried? Because not even I, with everything I've experienced, thought she would be capable of that. The days that followed were quiet indoors, but noisy outside. The kind of noise that doesn't come from a horn or siren. It comes from a low voice on the sidewalk, from whispering in the market, from gazes crossing at Sunday Mass. I didn't say anything to anyone, but the small town has its ways of spreading what needs to be heard. The story of the rupture took shape in the corridors of the church, in the circles of the community breakfast, in the hall where the ladies of the choir rehearse every Wednesday. And this time, it wasn't gossip. It was indignation. I accidentally heard when I passed through the back of the parish, two ladies saying, "After everything he did for that boy, is that what he gets?" Another replied, "What Brian did was unforgivable. It doesn't even seem like he was raised there with so much love." I just lowered my head and followed, not because I was ashamed, but because, for the first time, I felt that the weight was no longer mine alone. On the street, they began to leave small notes at the gate. Simple thing, a folded paper, a handwritten card. "Go ahead, Chester, you're right. Don't lower your head. You are an example for all of us." These were the words of someone who knew me. From those who saw me sweep the sidewalk on Sundays, repair bicycles for the neighborhood children, help maintain the roof of the church without ever asking for anything in return. Elaine, my next-door neighbor, was the firmest. When she saw Brian on the sidewalk trying to talk to the pastor, she crossed the street and said loudly, "You should be ashamed. Your father has always been there for you. Now he's alone. And even so, it's more whole than ever." She told me later with teary eyes that she never thought she would need to defend a man like me. "You always defended everyone. It was time for someone to give back." Brian tried. He tried to justify himself to acquaintances, tried to paint a lighter version of the facts. But it didn't stick, because who knew me knew. I knew about the time I sold my car to pay for his college. From the night I took Amanda to the hospital and waited in the hallway until the doctor said she was fine, even though no one had called me. I knew about the dozens of birthdays of my grandchildren where I showed up with gifts, even when they didn't even tell me that there would be a party. All this, it does not go out. Amanda stopped going out. They said that she started to order delivery by app, even to get medicine. People crossed the street when they saw the two walking. Not out of anger, but out of embarrassment. And I was still the same. Silent, sweeping the entrance, watering the plants, listening to low music in the morning. But inside me, something had changed. It wasn't pride. It was respect. Mine for myself. Something that took me too long to rescue, and even with all of this unfolding around me, something told me that the story was not over yet. Because people who miss the stage, he always tries to come back with another costume. And Amanda was not the type to accept losing. What she tried to do soon after was cowardly, but it was also the moment when I discovered the strength that I didn't even know still lived in me. Are you prepared to hear what she did? Because that part, no one in the neighborhood knew until now. That night had a different silence, the kind of silence that time warns that a storm is coming. I had already reinforced most of the locks in the house, changed the cores, installed motion sensors. But I left a door, that of the funds, not by forgetfulness, not by carelessness, by intuition. It was old, made of heavy wood, with a creaking lock, but it was symbolic. That's where Brian came in when he came back from games as a teenager so as not to wake his mother. And that's where, in my mind, he would come again, not as a son, but as someone trying to redeem what he lost by force. I went to sleep with a quiet soul, but an attentive heart, and there was no other. 2:30 in the morning, a dry crack at the back of the house, the sound of forced latching. Soon after, the alarm went off, deafening, cutting through the dawn like a razor. I got up slowly, took the cane that I only use when I really need it, and went down the steps calmly. I didn't open the door. I looked out the window, and there he was. Brian, standing in the backyard, shirt half open, looked scared. The back gate wide open, like the shame he still didn't know how to hold. The police arrived quickly. The system I installed was directly connected to the central office. In less than 5 minutes, 2 patrol cars stopped in front of my house, lights flashing, waking up half the neighborhood. Neighbors began to leave the house, in their pajamas, with blankets on their shoulders, trying to understand what was happening. And I only opened the front door when the officers were already with Brian, leaning against the car, asking for explanations. One of them asked me, "Does this man live here?" And I answered the same way I answered so many questions in life, directly. He doesn't live here. There is no key, and there is no name in this house anymore. I signed the occurrence with a firmness that only abandonment teaches. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look them in the eye. I just pointed to the gate. Amanda arrived minutes later, running, in tears, in a coat and slippers. I wanted to understand. I wanted to defend. But this time, no one there listened. The scene was theirs. Shame, too. The police officer was polite. He did not handcuff. He only asked Brian to go with them to the police station to clarify what happened. "Invasion of property," he said. And yet he looked at me with pity. But I didn't want pity. I wanted respect. I went back inside with the same silence I had carried for years. I closed the door slowly. I sat in the armchair. The house still shook with the echo of the siren. And even so, I managed to sleep. Not a light sleep, but a sleep I hadn't felt in years. The sleep of those who did what needed to be done. There are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. Like this video and sign up, and let's make this story reach those who need it. Because I know I'm not the only one to have loved too much, forgiven too much, and finally said, enough. But anyone who thinks that this was their last attempt is wrong, because after the public shame came the lowest attempt, and this time they even involved the children. Can you imagine what they did to my grandchildren? That's right, neither do I, until I see it with my own eyes. Do you know when we climb up to an old place in the house and smell the weather? That smell of aged wood, fine dust, and kept memory? It was like this when I decided, on a cold morning, to go up to the attic. I hadn't been there for years. I'd just gone up to fix some leaks, some threads, but that day, I can't explain it, I was pulled by a strange desire. It was as if someone was calling me. I pushed the trapdoor cover, climbed with the help of the ladder, and stood there, looking at everything calmly. The sunlight came in through the small window and touched a brown cardboard box, half crumpled, with her name written in her own hand. Susan. Guys. I almost didn't recognize the handwriting at first, but when I saw it, time came back in a breath. The box was light, but the contents, it weighed a lifetime. Inside, letters, many, tied with a faded blue ribbon. Letters that Susan has written to me over the years. There were birthdays, important dates, difficult moments. Some I remembered, others I didn't even know existed. She had a habit of writing when she couldn't say it with her mouth. It was her way of leaving love without noise. I sat right there on the dusty floor with my legs crossed and my heart open, and I started reading. In one of them, from 20-odd years ago, she said, "You carry more people on your back than you realize, Chester. One day, it will tire you out, and when that day comes, don't be afraid to stop." In another, written shortly after Brian's graduation, she talked about the fear she felt. "Sometimes I think we spoil our son too much. He will need to fall to understand the value of the hands that raised him." And the harshest and truest letter was dated 2006. I had never read it. She should have saved it for a special moment. But life didn't give time. In it, Susan wrote, "If one day our son treats you like a stranger, remember that you were everything to him, and that says more about his blindness than about his value." It hit me like a tight hug and a stab at the same time. Her words, coming from the past, explained my present. It wasn't crazy, it wasn't exaggeration, it wasn't rancor. It was reality. Susan already knew. Somehow, she already knew. And now I felt less alone. Because what hurts the most about being discarded, it is not the loss, it's the doubt, the question that no one answers. Did I deserve this? And there, in that letter, my wife told me no, that I was everything, that I gave everything. I stayed there for hours, reading, rereading, crying shamelessly, because there are tears that are not weakness, it is liberation. It's the body saying, "I get it." When I put everything back in the box and went down carefully, something in me had changed. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't revenge. It was clarity, and when we see with a clean heart, even pain becomes a path. You know, if you've made it this far, it's because this story is also poking some memory of yours. And let me tell you something with all the truth of my chest. The most striking is yet to come. Because sometimes, when we think we have already lived the last turning point of life, fate comes and shows that justice has its own time. And that weekend, it was as if life said, "Now it's your turn, Chester." And what happened, no one in the city would ever forget. Can you imagine what it was? For I saw it with my own eyes, and to this day, it looks like a movie scene. The months passed as the seasons pass here in Oregon, slowly but with deep scars. Summer is gone, autumn has painted the leaves golden, and I I started to breathe differently. I can't remember the last time I had so much time alone with myself, without obligation, without waiting, without walking on eggshells. I started small. I bought some seedlings, cleaned the back bed and planted my first vegetable garden. Tomato, basil, red onion. Every morning I went down with the kettle in my hand, looked at each bud, watered carefully, as if I were watering my own soul. It was a simple way of saying, I'm still here. Later, in an old notebook that I found in the desk drawer, I began to write. Not letters, nor do they vent, but memories, life stories, things that no one remembers anymore, but that I still carry with me. The smell of Susan baking apple pie, the day Brian learned to ride a bike and fell 5 times, but got up smiling. And until that Sunday in 1989, when the rain fell heavily and we got everything wet at the picnic. And yet, it was our family's happiest day. Elaine, my neighbor, started to pass by here more often, not out of pity, that she never had, but out of respect. We had coffee on the balcony, chatted, laughed at the past. One day, she read an excerpt from my diary and said, "Chester, these stories need to be read. There are a lot of people out there feeling the same pain, but in silence." Oh, that stuck in my head. And one Thursday afternoon, I sat down with her and we wrote an email to a veterans association. I told my story. I asked if there was room to listen to others. The following week, I was in a circle of chairs, with white-haired gentlemen, some with walkers, others with their heads held high, all with eyes marked by absences, each one with their pain, their betrayal, their family that has become a memory. There I understood. My story was just one among many. But perhaps it could be the voice of those who have not yet had the courage to tell theirs. In the meantime, I received a formal correspondence, Brian. But this time, it was not a letter, nor a tearful message. It was a letterhead, signed by a lawyer. A request for revision of the terms of the will. Cold formality to try to get back through the door that he himself slammed hard. I didn't answer, even if it was with a full stop. I took the envelope, folded it carefully and threw it into the lit fireplace, letting it burn along with everything I no longer carry. Because, you see, for the first time in decades, I'm no longer living for anyone. I don't expect a call. I don't offer help where I'm not welcome. And I don't bend anymore to fit into what others expect of me. Today, I wake up, make my coffee, harvest what I have planted, write what I have lived, and share what I can. My days are mine. My choices are clean. My house, it is my temple. And if you've come this far listening to this story, it's because you also carry some pain that has been silenced for too long. But I tell you, there is life after disappointment. And it can be mild, it can be yours, only yours. But life has those. When we think that we have closed all the cycles, an unexpected face appears at the door. And what this girl told me on that Sunday morning changed everything. Can you imagine who showed up here so many months later? Well, I never would have guessed. And what she brought, it was the last missing piece in the puzzle of my heart. The other day I sat down to write in my diary, and the pen seemed lighter. The words came by themselves, as if they were waiting all this time to come out. I wrote like this: "It hurt, and it still hurts. But if I hadn't been dropped off at that airport, I might never have woken up." And that is the truth. Because there are things that we only understand when the ground disappears, when what seemed safe becomes absence. And we find ourselves there, alone, with a suitcase in our hand and a whole life on our backs, trying to understand where it was that it was no longer a priority. I lived that day as someone who watches his own funeral, but it was also there that the Chester that speaks to you now was born. I remembered everything: the connection in the terminal, the deafening silence of the taxi, The kettle on the stove, whistling like a whale. The bank statement spitting out every penny of my affection thrown away. The briefcase in the lawyer's lap, the door being changed. The rain falling on two strangers I once called family. Susan's letters, like hands from the past, supporting me without judging. The night Brian tried to come back through the shadows and found a father he no longer recognized. The motel, the community, the tickets, the vegetable garden, the smell of damp earth. The noise of the old typewriter that Elaine gave me, meetings with veterans, the stories exchanged, the discovery that I was no exception, no victim. I was just another man who loved too much and who had to lose everything to remember himself. I don't have anger. And look, this is perhaps the most difficult to explain because anger gives meaning to pain, right? But no, what I have is clarity, and clarity hurts more at first, but then it calms down. Today I know who I was, what I gave, where I made mistakes by excess, and where I got it right, even though I was ignored. I know that loving is not synonymous with annulling yourself, and I know that forgiveness, it is not always reconciliation. Sometimes it's just a silence that doesn't charge anything anymore. Outside, the garden is in bloom. I planted daisies in the corner that Susan liked. I restored her rocking chair, sanded it with my own hands, and varnished it with care. It's there, on the porch, as if she was going to sit down at any moment, and you know, sometimes I think she really sits when the wind blows the right way. There are things that we feel and don't need to explain. And me, I follow. With my coffee in my cup, the newspaper on my lap, and my chest less tight. I live a small but full life. And if there's one thing I've learned in this whole story, it's just that self-love, when it finally arrives, doesn't make a sound. He just sits next to us with respect and says, "It took a while, but I arrived. But before you think that this is the last line of this notebook, let me tell you who showed up at the gate that afternoon, because there are reunions that don't ask for forgiveness, but turn on a light that we thought we would never see again. And this time, it was different, very different. That afternoon, I was sitting on the park bench, watching the leaves fall as if slowly saying goodbye to what has already served its time. A boy ran by, Ed's grandson, my neighbor. He said goodbye to me excitedly, one of those that we only receive when the soul is light. I smiled back, a whole smile without shadow, without remainder, because the truth is that today I walk with my steps, no longer walking on eggshells to please those who never looked at me properly. Brian and Amanda did come back. But when they arrived, they found another man, not the one who opened his wallet and heart without measuring. They found a man who learned that silence is also an answer, and that absence can be protection. There was no fight. There was no speech, just a closed gate and an open soul to start over. The trip I didn't take to Hawaii ended up taking me to the most important destination of my life, the meeting with myself. Because sometimes, to find yourself again, you have to get a little lost in the hands of others. And today I know I was left behind, yes, but I was the one who decided never to go back to the same place. If I could leave a single lesson for those who have listened so far, it would be this: love without respect is a debt that is never paid. We can love too much and still need to leave, because forgiveness is liberation, but starting over requires courage. I discovered that pain is a teacher, that time is medicine, and that dignity. This is not negotiable. Everyone has their own limit, and when it is crossed, it is a sign that we need to return home, not the one with walls, but the one inside. The one that no one can invade without permission, and I want to thank from the bottom of my heart you who have stayed with me so far. To hear someone tell a story like this is to make room within yourself, and to tell is also to heal. If this piece of my life touched yours, if you saw a mirror on the other side, or if you felt a hug, leave a like on this video. For me, this gesture is like a silent hug, which warms up more than a lot of words. And if you want to come back for another coffee with me, subscribe here to the channel. There is always room on the balcony for one more chair. Write there in the comments of which city you are watching. I want to know how far my story has come, and maybe find other stories similar to mine, and it activates the bell, okay? That way, you don't lose when the coffee is brewed again. Don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.